You're listening to Alamo City Limits podcast with Noah Magaro-George, the official San Antonio Spurs podcast of Pounding the Rock in SB Nation.
What's going on, Spurs fans? Welcome back to Alamo City Limits, the official San Antonio Spurs podcast of SB Nation and Pounding the Rock. As always, I'm your host, Noah Magaro-George, and that's my co-host, Damien Bartonek. Man, how are you doing on this fantastic early Friday morning?
I'm feeling really good, man. Honestly, I wish I had a Zoa. I need me just a quick little stim real quick, man. But overall, I'm really excited, bro. I'm really excited to talk about this episode. I really liked our last one, and I like kind of the feedback we got, kind of from both sides. Some people said we were a little bit too negative. Some people said we were, kind of called it how we see it. So overall, man, I'm really excited to be here. Really excited to talk about the play-in stuff. And let's just get into this, bro. I'm ready.
Yeah, and just so our listeners are aware, we're recording this podcast on April 8th at about 9 a.m. Central Time. But Dame, we're finally closing the book on another regular season. And just like we predicted in the previous episode, the Spurs have officially clinched one of the final play-in spots in the Western Conference play-in tournament. And as it stands right now, San Antonio will face the Pelicans in New Orleans next Wednesday with the hopes of making their playoffs for the first time since 2019. So before we dive into that matchup, what have you seen from the Spurs since the last time we hopped on the mic? Because they're 7-3, and I know a lot of people are saying they're playing their best basketball of the season. What are your opinions? What have you seen from them?
First, I think in the intro, in the beginning part, I said call it how we seed it. So that's how you can tell it's definitely early in the morning, because I don't know what I'm on right now. But no, overall, man, I think for me, obviously we have to take into context the teams that they're playing, right? I mean, you're playing. What was it? How many times did they play Portland over the stretch? 3 times, 2 times? Yeah, 3 times, and they're not even an NBA team right now. So I get, I'm glad they're taking care of business that they should be. I think that's more so what I'm taking, away from this entire stretch of hoops for them, Noah, is I already know they can beat bad teams. We know this. So I'm glad they're still doing it, right? But at that in that same kind of breath here, I'm not going to sit here and take a whole lot of stock, put much stock in what they've been doing over this stretch, because it's against really bad competition. Now, I will say, beating, Denver, although Denver was, 3 of 17 on open threes the other night, beating Denver without Dejounte Murray is a win that I think they should kind of hang their hat on over this stretch. But all in all, man, I don't think I've seen anything that's really wowing me over this stretch, other than the fact that I'm glad they're taking care of the business that they should be taking care of. I hope that doesn't sound too negative, but at the same time, too, I'm not going to sit here and sell y'all wolf tickets and say they're beating the Suns or they're beating Philly or they're beating, whomever over this stretch. They're not. But in that same breath, be happy with what they're doing. They have, early on in the year showed the ability to play, up and down the competition, and kind of right now they're kind of playing more consistent. So I think overall, what stood out to me is the Spurs are just taking care of business, man. It's nothing, too crazy, but at the same time, I think everyone should be just content, excited for this play-in, and I'm really, really curious to hear your perspective. I know we have some other things we'll talk about, but I think I want to just jump right into this, bro. Personally, for you, man, how much stock are you putting into this play-in berth? Because you've kind of been a guy that's been up and down on it. I'm really curious to get your perspective on this, man.
Yeah, like I said last time, the Spurs are getting into the play-in not because they're playing elite basketball right now. It's more, the recent soft schedule in conjunction with all these other teams kind of just phoning it in for the rest of the season. I mean, let's be honest. They beat the shorthanded Thunder on a buzzer beater after they blew a massive lead. They routed the openly tanking Blazers 3 times. We already talked about that. They outlasted the Steph Curry-less Warriors on a last-second go-ahead bucket from Keldon Johnson, which is amazing. But Draymond Green also got ejected early in the second half of that, so it's not like they were playing a contender at full strength. Then you had them blowing a huge lead to the tanking Rockets. They barely hold on to win that one. They survived the Pelicans minus Brandon Ingram after they blew a 10-point lead with less than 4 minutes left in that game. I mean, Dame, I'm not trying to be overly negative here, but when I look at these games, the thing that I take away is, yes, they are taking care of business and they're able to hold on for these wins. But that's not really winning basketball to be blowing these massive leads against bad teams. I mean, you held on, but these teams, just like you had a chance to beat the Thunder and you had a chance to beat Golden State on a buzzer beater, they're a buzzer beater away from beating you as well. So I don't know if the Spurs are playing their best basketball of the season. The one thing I will say is the Denver blowout, that's a huge confidence booster. I mean, you just beat a team on the road with the reigning MVP, probably going to be back-to-back MVP. And I know that he went off for like 40-something points or 38 points or something like that. But really, you held everybody else in check. In that same breath, they let the Denver Nuggets shoot 17 wide-open threes. They went 3 for 17 on those open threes. That's only about 17%. The Nuggets shoot 35% on open threes this season. So I wouldn't hedge your bets on letting a team shoot that many open threes. And we saw it the very next game. The Timberwolves hit 20 threes. Dame, 20 threes in a game. Anthony Edwards drops a career-high 49 points. And I guess what I take away from this is I don't really know how to evaluate this team. I don't want to be overly negative. I don't want to sing their praises either and say, man, they're playing, the best basketball of the season. They're really rolling. I mean, I just don't know where to land on the spectrum here. They've made it really tough to evaluate them. But one thing I do know is they've had a lot of players individually who've shown a lot of strong things. And I think that's something we should dive into because regardless of who they're playing, they can't, we've said this before, they can't really choose who they play. They're just going to play who's in front of them. So the one thing that really stands out is they have a lot of young players who are playing well right now. And I think that's something we should definitely dive into.
Yeah, I think for me, the guy that really stood out to me is Devin Vassell. It's interesting because when you look at his individual numbers as a starter and a reserve, although he's playing, as a starter, I believe where's the numbers at? Yeah, like about 6 minutes more per game as a starter. The usage is the exact same. The true shooting percentage is around the same. The three-point percentage is higher. The field goal percentage is lower. Overall, he's in kind of that same exact role he was off the bench. But I think as a starter, he provides some needed versatility at the 2, the 3 that you kind of really need in the modern NBA, especially for a team like San Antonio that doesn't have any versatility at the 3 and the 4. A guy like Vassell that kind of provides you that switchability, kind of 1 through 3 as a defender. I really liked what I've seen from him, although he's kind of struggled a little bit, and in certain games kind of been a little bit up and down. What's really interesting to me, Noah, is he's in a role that's so similar to what he was already in that moving him to the starting lineup for me, I'm kind of not shocked, but I'm more so impressed that he's able to still be effective in this role, and Coach Pop is confident enough to kind of still put him in this role. And I think long term, man, he's really proving to be that player that I believed in terms of value, that you need to have him around because no matter where you go, directionally as a franchise, Devin Vassell fits, man. So I think that's really stood out to me is Vassell's able to do whatever you need. Really, man. I mean, talk about, a gadget kind of player that could just really fit in whatever, what's going on. Man, Devin Vassell's the chicken breast of this Spurs team, man. You can put chicken breast, cook it however you want. You can get a grilled chicken parm. You can barbecue chicken, no matter what it is, man. That's Devin Vassell. So I think for me, man, what's really stood out with Devin Vassell specifically is his versatility, his ability to be effective, and overall, he's emerging and becoming that player that me and you have talked about for so long. So Devin Vassell's a guy I really like.
And he's shooting really well from 3 right now. From his last 9 games, he's taken almost 6.5 3-point attempts per game. He's shooting 44.8% from 3. So like we mentioned, or as you mentioned a second ago, he's not really shooting that well from other areas. He's struggling to finish around the rim over those 9 games. 57% at the rim, 30% in the paint on non-rim attempts, 35% from mid-range. But from the 3-point range, I mean, man, he's been really good, and I think that's a huge stride for him because I still believe that he has some self-creation potential. I still think he can take some guys off the dribble every once in a while. We really see that he loves that little spin move to fade away. That's kind of like his signature thing when he goes off the dribble, and usually it's only like a couple of dribbles and then he goes into that move. But really, the Spurs don't need him to be that self-creator, that go-to scorer. They need a guy who, at least how this team is constructed right now going into the play-in against the Pelicans, they need a guy who can catch and shoot, who can hit movement threes, because they're missing that with a guy like Doug McDermott on the sideline. So for me, Devin Vassell, could he be more efficient in other areas? Definitely. He is struggling in other areas, but him really lighting it up from 3-point range, I think that's huge for the Spurs because they're a team that really doesn't have or didn't have a ton of 3-point shooting, but he's going to provide that. And I really firmly believe he's a guy who eventually at some point in his career will be shooting closer to 40% from 3 than he is for his first 2 years, which is about 35%. So Really happy to see the progress he's made there beyond the arc. And I think another player who you wrote down on the rundown who we definitely should get into a little bit is Zach Collins. I mean, man, I don't want to say we've been harsh on him because I think we were realistic with how he was producing, but we were also fair saying, he hasn't played in a year and a half. He doesn't know these players. He hasn't built chemistry with these guys. So we weren't expecting him to be this world beater, but that was a realistic take. But now he's playing really well. Again, bad teams, but he can't help who he's playing against. And I'm looking over his last 9 games, I believe. Zach Collins has scored in double figures in 7 of them, and he's only shot below 50% once. So, Dame, what are you seeing from Zach Collins right now? Because honestly, he may be playing some of his best basketball, not just of the season, but maybe even of his career.
Yeah, I think for me, Zach Collins right now in the month of April, through 4 games, albeit averaging 14.8 points, 8 rebounds, 2.8 assists, shooting 56.3% from the field, 43% from 3, although he's only attempted 7 threes. He's never going to be, a high-volume three-point shooter, so I think overall, man, I agree with you. I think this is probably some of the best stretch of hoops that we've seen, especially, since he's come back. But overall, I mean, throughout his career, he's been kind of that up-and-down guy as well. I don't want to say the word disappointing. I guess underwhelming might be a better word, throughout his career a little bit. But he just looks comfortable, man. How many times have me and you, said Zach just needs reps? He just needs to play. Like, that's the biggest deal here, is just getting him out there, being able to play, along these guys, really build up some chemistry, and overall get back up to speed, get back to the NBA level, whether it's conditioning, whether it's, the feel for the game, everything like that. And now it seemed like the game's kind of slowing down for him a little bit because, like you mentioned, man, earlier on, whenever we were talking about Zach Collins, it was getting to a point where you're kind of like, okay, if we talk about this guy again, it might sound like we're being a little too negative about what's going on. But now he's really starting to turn that corner. And I think, let's say he has another, good couple of games to close out this season and a solid playing game. That's kind of one of those things where I'm like, all right, like, that's a good place to end off. Now let's see how he can build from it. I'm not saying, the playing's going to be the end-all, be-all for what I think about Zach Collins. But what I am saying is, for a player that's missed this much time, to see him finally start to come into his own, carve out a role, play much better. I mean, shooting 56% from the field, albeit in only 4 games, attempting 32 shots, you'll take that from your rotational 5 any day of the week. So I think overall, Noah, if you're a Spurs fan, you should be happy. One last thing before I dish it to you real quick. You mentioned the shot creation about Devin Vassell. That's not an issue, not saying that you said it was. That's not an issue right now, because what's the player we've been projecting him to be, right now has been Mikal Bridges, right? In a role that's very similar to that. And now Mikal's starting to flash out a little bit now as well. But I think being on that trajectory isn't a bad thing. So in year 2, if we're seeing this from Vassell right now, obviously there's a lot of improvements he needs to make. But I think overall, everyone should be happy with that. And I think that Mikal, trajectory that you mentioned, that you've been on for, a year and a half now, 2 years, I think that really fits him. So I'm going to dish it back to you, Zach Collins. I had to get one last thing about Devin Vassell, though. I had to.
Yeah, no, no problem. And I think, like, when I'm looking at Zach Collins, I think the things that really, like, pop off the screen for you is his efficiency. Since I think it's March 16th, so his last 9 games, 82% at the rim. Now, is that going to carry on forever? No, but that's really good for a player for his career. Only shot 58% at the rim, which is way below league average. So he's showing more touch at the rim. He's being more patient. He's being more aggressive. He's finishing through contact. He's getting to the free throw line. His fouls, which we were talking about, this guy was nearly fouling out per 36 every game. It was like on the brink of 6 fouls per 36. Only 2 fouls per game over his last 9 games. His turnovers are way down. His assists are up. His 3-point percentage is up. His 3-point volume is up. So everything is sort of trending in the right direction for Zach Collins. So I'm happy to see that, because really we had talked about it. And it's like, okay, we can be patient with them and the Spurs have a nice contract here, but is this a situation where they go into the offseason going, okay, we need a plan B? Because right now, Zach Collins as a backup 5 isn't working. But just like we were talking about Lonnie, he had a really nice stretch. Are we going to buy into that long term? Maybe not. But same thing with Zach Collins. But at least him heading into an offseason, trending in the right direction, playing some of the best basketball of his career, building some confidence, being healthy, that's huge. Because I know that a lot of people were really excited for Zach Collins, and they were a little bit disappointed, as you said. But, I mean, this gives you hope that he can build on this during the summer, maybe get in the gym, work on a few things, become a little more consistent, and that's huge for the Spurs because if they don't have to be searching for a backup 5 and they can rely on Zach Collins, suddenly that $7 million per year contract over the next couple of years, it looks really nice. It looks really, really nice. So definitely a guy that I think is proving himself not just to Spurs fans, but also the coaching staff because Jock Landale isn't getting in the game anymore. This is a guy who, this is my role. He's taken over the role. There's no question. Love Jock Landale, but there's no question who should be playing those minutes now.
Yeah, 100%. I think right before I dish it to you about your guy Tre Jones, because we need to get into that. Zach Collins, I believe earlier on, like a couple podcasts ago, like in terms of points per possession and the percentiles he plays as a roll man, I think he was like in like the 10th percentile. Like he was really down there. Right now though, he's in the 57th percentile as a roll man, averaging 1.14 points per possession. So I think you're seeing a little bit, obviously in a specific role like that, he's at a frequency of 27% there. So you're going to see him improve there, right? As the more time he plays in the league, I'm sure he's going to get better. I don't think he's a 20th percentile roll man personally, but I think overall, man, you should be encouraged so far from what you've seen. Not to say he's going to be a world beater, he's going to be, your starting 5 for years to come, but that's not why you brought him in. There's obviously other roles he can fulfill, and I think right now he's in a solid place. So I think it's time, Noah, to talk about your guy. Tre Jones, he's been keeping the Spurs offense afloat without Dejounte. As a starter, man, his numbers look really, really good. I'm not going to tell, the people these things. I need you to tell them, man. So what have you seen from your guy, Tre Stones, man? I need to hear this.
Well, first off, let's talk about how there were a lot of Spurs fans, not on just Twitter or Facebook, just all social media, who were kind of starting to throw him under the bus like he was Bryn Forbes. Oh, this guy can't shoot. Oh, he's too small to defend. Oh, he's a waste of minutes. He shouldn't be out there. He shouldn't be playing. Come on, man. He's a second-round pick, 41st overall pick. You didn't draft him to be the starter. You didn't draft him to play along Dejounte Murray for 25 minutes per game. He was thrust into minutes because of injuries. And now we're seeing, Tre Jones, he is that guy who can come off the bench and be your backup point guard. And if Dejounte Murray's hurt, he can fill in admirably as the spot starter. Man, over the last 4 games, nearly 14 points per game, nearly 5 rebounds per game, 8.5 assists per game, and Dame, 2 turnovers. That's it. And they both came against Minnesota last night. Before that, no turnovers and over 100 minutes played in those first 3 games as a spot starter without Dejounte. So, I mean, he's starting to take threes off the dribble. He's starting to take threes confidently as a catch and shooter. Now the volume isn't high, 1.3 threes per game. That's not going to, scream 3-point shooter to anybody. But the fact that he's working on these things mid-season, that he's showing Pop, hey, I want these minutes. I want to prove I'm worthy of this. I want to show you that I'm working on things that I've struggled with all season. Man, I'm really, really happy with what I've seen from Tre Jones because, man, he has just been one of the better, I would say almost, you could make an argument, the best second-round pick from his draft class. I mean, Dame, can you think of other people? I mean, there's a few others who you can throw in there. I think maybe Kevin Martin, or not Kevin Martin, I'm sorry, Kevin Martin Jr., KJ Martin over with the Houston Rockets, maybe even a guy, and I someone on Twitter said Tio Maledon, but I mean, that guy's been pretty bad for the Thunder, and they're bad. He's in a bad context. But, man, I think Tre Jones has an argument that he is the best second-round pick from his class already.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I kind of liked Jameis Ramsey coming out, and there's no bias I could get you anyway past saying that. Yeah, Tre Jones he's probably the best second round pick in his class, and I think too, man. Adding on to that, you mentioned that it was 34 assists to 2 turnovers, and the 2 turnovers were from the other night. As a starter in general, he has 76 assists to 9 turnovers in 10 games as a starter. Like that is filthy. What have we've talked about Tre Jones so much and kind of that role as like kind of a heavy pick and roll ball handler kind of guard, whether it's off the bench as a starter or whatever, right? He just fits what the Spurs want to do. If they're going to run heavy pick and roll, right, they don't run a lot of isolation plays, so the self-creation stuff isn't going to really be that much of a factor as as their starting guard. I believe the Spurs they only run isolation like 3.1% of their offense. So
yeah, they're 29th in the league in ISO.
Yeah, like overall, Tre Jones just fits what the Spurs want to do. He ranks in the 67th percentile as a pick and roll ball handler according to points per possession at a frequency of 31%. Like, I think overall, Noah, you've been money with Tre Jones. I think for what the Spurs need, he fits that. And I think similarly, not to say he's like Devin Vassell, but similarly to a guy like Devin Vassell, that no matter where you go, Vassell just fits what you want to do. It's kind of the same thing with Tre Jones, that in the NBA today, you're going to run heavy pick and roll. I mean, you're going to run that, a third of your offensive sets, it seems like. And Tre Jones fits that. So I've been really, really encouraged, from what I've seen from him. And I agree, man. I think some people were kind of quick to kind of jump on him and say he's not this, he's not that. But last time I checked, bro, not every point guard is going to be Ja Morant. Not every point guard is going to be Trae Young. Not every point guard is going to be Chris Paul. So you need, rotational point guards. You need guys that can, fit a specific play type, especially that fits for the modern NBA. And I think Tre Jones does that. So I'm happy for you, man. I'm happy that Trey Stones. Shout out to Matthew. What's his Tynan?
Matt Tynan, yeah.
Yeah, he. I thought my nickname was better than yours personally, but I guess he wasn't really feeling it. So it is what it is.
Yeah, I actually didn't make that up for him. I heard them say that when he hit this big buzzer beater for Duke. He missed a free throw. He got his own rebound off the free throw. He hits a buzzer beater against North Carolina, and they win the game. And ever since I heard that, I was like, man, that's got to be his nickname. So I've heard people call him that before. I think it's fun. I mean, really, he really has he's been fearless. I mean, obviously the 3-point shooting is coming along. He's still figuring things out, but I don't think you could ask for a lot more from a guy who, I mean, previously for most of the season, he had been in and out of the rotation, 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there. And again, this is against 2 games against Portland, 1 against Denver, 1 against Minnesota. So 2 playoff teams, and then obviously 2 games against a team that's barely an NBA team right now. They are one of the worst teams in NBA history just since they shut everybody down. But regardless, just like we mentioned with a guy like Devin Vassell, Zach Collins, they can't choose who they play. They're just going to go out there. They're going to perform. And Tre Jones is performing well. He's helped the Spurs go 3-1 without Dejounte, and that's awesome because when Dejounte comes back, now you have a backup point guard who, when Dejounte sits, you don't have to worry. He's going to keep things going. He's going to make sure the flow of the offense is, going right along. So really happy with those guys. Dame, is there anybody else who you want to talk about in particular over the stretch, or should we move on to kind of the guy who's the star of the show recently with Dejounte gone?
Yeah, I want to talk about Keldon Johnson, man. I specifically because, we've had a couple of pieces on Pounding the Rock discussing his game, and I think he's been fantastic. I had a line in my recent game preview where I kind of talk about, his next step as an, offensive talent. And I said, on about 8 drives per game, if Johnson can parlay these temporary skills off the dribble into a consistent output offensively, the Spurs' shot creation issues may trend in a positive direction. And that's exactly what we're seeing from him. I clipped a couple of your clips as well into that article, so, kind of showing that, hey, off the bounce, he's showing the ability to actually have vision and make that pass to, whether it's a Jakob Poeltl rolling or a kick to the corner, something like that. And we didn't see that, right? I mean, before, how many times have we talked about kind of the tunnel vision off the dribble? Keldon Johnson's really a straight line drive to the basket, and that's about it, right? But we've seen even a little bit of pull-up threes and stuff like that. So I think overall, man, I got to ask you, do you believe that we're seeing Keldon, take another developmental leap as an offensive talent?
Yeah, and I think I'm a big proponent of don't call it before you see it, because I know a lot of times, whether it's spaces or my articles, people will be like, oh, you're saying Keldon can't be an all-star. Well, he's going to do this or he's going to do that. But for me, it's always like, okay, we got to slow our roll, because you're telling me, oh, he's this and that. He can shoot off the dribble from mid-range. He creates his own shot. He's got a dynamic dribble. He's going to be an all-star. But, respectfully, we hadn't seen that. When I see it, I'll tell you. And that's what we've seen recently. Now, his dribble package hasn't been dynamic. He's pretty limited. He's not been a good mid-range shooter. He's still sort of struggling on floaters inside the paint as of late. But one thing that he is doing, he's getting to the line at a pretty incredible rate, nearly 6 times per game over his last, I believe, 8 games. He's been really good at finishing once he's at the rim, which is something that he has struggled at throughout his career. I mean, you just take a look at his numbers from before the All-Star break. Before the All-Star break, shooting only 58% at the rim, which was 6 percentage points below league average. Now he's shooting 68.4% at the rim after the All-Star break, which is 4% above league average. So that's really good. Those are things that you can be really happy for. Has the 3-point shooting regressed a little bit? It has a little bit. But you know what? If you regress from shooting 48% from 3 to 38% from 3, well, then you're doing something right, because 38% from 3 is still well above league average. So Keldon Johnson, really impressed with him. And as you mentioned, the drives, man, that has been the biggest thing. We've seen his volume since the trade deadline go up a little bit. And for me, I was a little bit concerned. I went, okay, well, the volume's going up here now that Derek White's gone. What is he going to do? Because he hasn't been finding guys off the dribble. He's not finishing well at the rim. He's got that tunnel vision where, once he makes his mind up, that's what he's doing. He's either going to pass or he's going to try to finish through you. And he's not really aware of what's going on. He's committing careless turnovers. He's forcing things at the rim or around the basket. And we've seen with this uptick in volume and drives, his assist percentage has gone up. His turnover percentage has gone down. His passing percentage is up. His field goal percentage is up. His free throw rate is up on drives specifically. That's awesome. Those are all things that we said, he's not doing this. He's not doing that. He's not doing this. And I'm sure he's not listening to what we're saying, but I'm sure the coaching staff and Pop are telling him something similar. And he took that to heart. And he's implemented it, he's practiced it, and it's in the game now. We're seeing him take that stride. So I don't know where he goes from here, but I wrote an article about the things that we have seen from him, and I'm pretty confident that he's going to be able to carry this over for the rest of the season. And it's been 8 straight games now, Dame, of at least 20 points. That's only 4 shy of the record for a player under 22 in Spurs franchise history, and that man's name is Tim Duncan. So I'm not saying he's going to be Tim Duncan. I'm not even 100% sure he's going to be an all-star at any point in his career. But if you're watching Keldon Johnson, you're a Spurs fan, you got to be encouraged. So I want to know what you've seen from him, though, man, because honestly, there's really not a lot to complain about right now. He's playing really well.
Yeah, so in that same game preview that I mentioned earlier, kind of heading into this topic, I wrote that Keldon, in 17 of his last 28 games, he scored 20 or more points, or at least 20 points, rather. And, against Minnesota, he did it again, so that's 18 out of, 29 games. And overall, I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me this season, whether it's over this stretch or this season in general from him, is the fact that he's actually, I think we can firmly, believe that he's a well above average, I think, standstill three-point shooter, catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. I think the biggest thing for me, looking just at the raw numbers, is on basically double the volume, he's a 40% three-point shooter now. Last year on 2.6 threes, he was only shooting 33%, which is, well below league average. And I think for me, what stood out is how he's been able to be effective, although there's not a lot of shot versatility per se, kind of off the ball for him or on the ball really, he's still able to be effective. I mean, if you're placing in the 85th percentile as a spot-up shooter, if you're shooting 43% on catch-and-shoot threes, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter, where you're, what stage in your development, that's a skill set that fits the modern NBA. So I think as long as Keldon's able to do that and continue those flashes, man, because if he's able to actually create off the bounce for these players, for his teammates, for himself, man, you talk about opening up the offense a bit. That would do a lot. I mean, I don't think he's gonna have quote unquote on ball gravity like Luka Doncic or something like that. But still having the ability to attack a bad closeout or to be more than a one trick pony essentially with the ball in your hands, I think that's really, really important. And I think regardless of what happens over these next couple of games, if Keldon can tighten up that handle, because I agree, the handle, I mean, respectfully, it looks a little stiff, right? It's a little tight. It's not as, tight in a, not the good way that basically he needs some work there. But I think overall, man, Keldon's definitely taking these, these positive steps in the right direction. And I think overall, you have to be very, very excited about where he's going as a player. I don't know. We'll probably talk about his contract stuff in the offseason, I'm sure. But I think right now, man, be encouraged. I think that's what I kind of want everyone to take away from this.
And I also think it's just about leveraging what you're good at and making up for your weaknesses. And I think early on in the season, as we mentioned, I mean, he wasn't particularly good at covering up for his weaknesses, but now that he's starting to put everything together, he's got that shooting prowess that guys are screaming towards him, right? They're running at him hard. These closeouts are incredibly aggressive, and he can throw you a pump fake, or he can let you, get even with him, and then he'll get by you. He's not like the quickest guy, but he's really, really strong, and he's understanding how to leverage that shooting prowess into driving lanes. And that was the first step, right? Okay, now that guys are closing out on you, attack the driving lanes, and he would do that, but then he would miss teammates. And now he's not just attacking these closeouts and trying to get to the rim, but he's realizing that there's got to be a help defender who's got to rotate to stop him from getting to the rim. And he's not just bullying through them. He's not just trying to force his way to the basket. He's finding teammates. And some of these dump-off passes and some of these kickouts, they've been impressive considering he really hadn't shown that before. So just really encouraging stuff from Keldon Johnson. And I think that's about it for the players. I mean, we've seen positive stuff from other guys. we'll do a more in-depth like season review in the next episode, which is one that I'm really excited for because we're going to get a chance to take a look at all of our really good takes and be, proud that, hey, yo, I called that. And we're also going to have a chance to sort of just admit we were wrong about things because nobody bats 100. If we were batting 100, we wouldn't be on this podcast. We'd be working for some team. We would be, I don't know, we wouldn't be here. That's all I know. We would not be here if we were batting 100 on all of our takes, but that's the beauty of having takes. But man, let's go ahead and move on to our final topic and look ahead at this Spurs playing matchup against New Orleans. I mean, this is going to come up next week. As of right now, it will be in New Orleans since San Antonio is the lower seed. San Antonio is 3-1 against the Pelicans this season, but honestly, no game is going to hold more weight for these two teams than this divisional showdown to keep, honestly, just keep their playoff hopes alive. That's what these teams are doing. They're not in the playoffs. They're in the play-in. And so this is kind of the biggest matchup for either team. So, Dane, what are some of the keys to victory for the Spurs team? And are there any matchups that you're going to be keeping an eye on really closely as we head into this game?
Yeah, I think for me, first I gotta show some love to CJ McCollum since he's arrived in New Orleans. He's a player that I felt like has always been really underrated. And coming to New Orleans, obviously defensively, you've always known he's going to be kind of a little bit of a mismatch on that end. But offensively, man, averaging 25.6 points, 4.8 rebounds, 6.1 assists, shooting 50% from the field, 40% from three. He just fits everything that you want as just an on-ball creator. He can run the pick and roll. He can create for himself. I've used the term on-ball gravity again. And with him, it's like I said, it's not in the same tier as a guy like a Luka Doncic, Tre Young, whomever. But he knows the game, the ins and outs of the game. He's just a natural basketball player, a natural offensive player. I think that's kind of what sticks out to me most is the comfort and the confidence in his game with the ball in his hands. I think he can even do some off-ball stuff too. That's kind of a little bit underrated in his game as well. So overall, man, I just love his game. And I think when it comes to matchups, the Spurs got to do something with him. Because C.J. McCollum is a guy that can, obviously he's shown it over, a big stretch here with New Orleans, but he's a guy for me that he can get you 30 and 8 assists and, a couple rebounds and really impact the game as it, goes down to the wire. So I personally really am watching C.J. McCollum to see what that looks like. Also, New Orleans in their games against San Antonio, they're shooting 46% from the field, 33% from three, and 73.6% from the line against the Spurs. And those are all well below their averages in their wins on the year. I believe the numbers where they shot, I think, over 36% from three in their wins, 48% from the field. So the Spurs have actually defended them relatively well. And the Spurs have also not been a good defensive team this year, so that's going to be kind of interesting for me to see, Noah. And lastly, I think the Valanciunas-Poeltl matchup from last year's play is going to be pretty interesting to watch as well. I know Valanciunas was a little banged up, when I wrote this write-up, but I think in general, that's going to be an interesting matchup, right? Because Poeltl's defense against guys that can actually kind of bang bodies with him down low, have some good footwork and stuff like that, it's pretty interesting to see how he defends those kind of guys because obviously, I don't expect him to stop Joel Embiid, but those kind of second-tier kind of post scorers like that, I'm kind of curious to see how he looks. So for me, no, those are kind of like my big kind of three things so far, but I would love to hear your take, especially you got one thing at the very end of this rundown that I would love to hear your opinion on about Zion. So we'll go there.
Yeah. So I guess like the Poeltl one with Valanciunas is huge because last year Poeltl went for 10 points, 10 rebounds. He had 5 blocks. They were all against guards except for one that came against Valanciunas, but he also had 5 fouls. So, I mean, it's not that he was bad by any means, but you take a look at Valanciunas in that game, 23 points, 23 rebounds. You didn't hear me wrong, 23. He had 23 rebounds, 5 offensive rebounds. That's a ton of second chance points. And he had 3 blocks. 2 of them came against Jakob. So, clearly he outplayed Jakob in that game. And I'm not, he doesn't have the luxury of playing with Jaren Jackson and John Moran and Desmond Bane and Kyle Anderson and Dylan Brooks anymore. But this Pelicans team is still good. And I think if you want to win this matchup, I know it gets overrated sometimes that, okay, rebounding is not the most important thing. But I think it is really important that you keep the other team off the offensive boards. Because if you give a team like New Orleans, really any team, chance after chance after chance against a scrambling defense when you can't secure a rebound, not only is it demoralizing, but it's really hard to keep them off the scoreboard even if you're playing good initial defense. So that's going to be really, really huge for the Spurs. I think the CJ McCollum one's going to be huge too. I would imagine Dejounte Murray gets that. He seems like the most logical guy who will be covering CJ McCollum. He's been out now 4 games, I believe, with this upper respiratory illness. It's not COVID. They haven't disclosed what it is in particular, but Dejounte went on Twitter, said, I've lost 7 to 8 pounds. I'm exhausted, this and that. And so I'm not worried about it, but I want to see Dejounte playing these last couple of games to get himself back up to speed, because I think if he comes into this matchup and he's not feeling 100%, then you don't really have a lot of answers for a guy like CJ McCollum. And I think Dejounte Murray, whether or not he makes an all-defensive team, I think we can all agree he's one of the better, or not just better, one of the best on-ball defenders in the NBA. And if you want to disrupt a guy like CJ McCollum, then throw an elite on-ball stopper at him. And you want to see Dejounte at 100%. But we can talk about some of the other things from this matchup, because there really are a lot of interesting things that have come from these games this season. I know the Spurs went 3-1, but I don't think that's the entire story. They're missing Zion. They missed Brandon Ingram in 2 of these matchups. CJ McCollum was only there for 2 of these matchups. This is not the same team that they played at the beginning of the season. And as you mentioned, Zion Williamson is kind of one of the things that is a question mark for this game. If I was New Orleans, I would say don't worry about it. We're not going to play Zion this year. He hasn't been healthy all year. It doesn't really make sense to integrate him last minute, but we saw Zion Williamson's stepfather go on a local radio show and say, yeah, I fully expect Zion to play this season for the Pelicans. And, well, I mean, you're in a play-in game. What else could that mean? That seems like he's saying, Zion is going to play. Now, he also said it's up to the team. I realize that, but he's started doing full court workouts. They don't have a timetable for his return, but it seems like he could return for this game. So personally, I don't think that he should, not just because I'm, rooting for the Spurs to win this game maybe, but also it just doesn't make a lot of sense. What is your opinion on that? Because I think if he does return, even if he's on a minutes restriction like we saw in his debut against the Spurs a few seasons ago, he can still be a game changer. That was really huge when he even on that minutes restriction, he dominated the Spurs. So what are your opinions on that?
Yeah, man, personally, I wouldn't be playing Zion at all. Not right now. I would just let it rock, let it ride out, and we'll start it again next year. But oh my goodness, man. I remember that game like it was yesterday. When he was hitting those threes, what did he hit, like 3 in a row? I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, hey, no way, Noah. I was like, hey, no way, man. Like literally that. Yeah, Zion he's an amazing talent. I'm still a big believer in him personally. I think that's honestly, Noah, like a topic I would love to discuss with, like, I'm a sports psychology minor rather, personally. And I think I would love to talk with someone that's a major in that, because I think there's a lot going on there, kind of behind the scenes. And I think right when he gets his mental in check, man, he's going to be a fantastic player. I mean, he's going to be, it's going to be amazing. I'm just going to put it like that. As far as specific other things, though, with this matchup in particular, a couple of numbers stood out to me kind of when I'm just looking at the Pelicans from a broad perspective here. As a pick-and-roll team, they're the 3rd worst offense in terms of points per possession. They're with the Magic and the Pistons at a relatively high frequency of over 16%. They're the 3rd worst at 0.79 points per possession. That places them in the 6th percentile. They had a scoring frequency of 37%. They only shoot 39% on shots out of the pick and roll for their pick and roll ball handlers. So I think that's going to be interesting to see, because the Spurs in general, I know you've mentioned this a couple times, so the Spurs tend to funnel middle and really kind of just give everything to Jakob, right? In the pick and roll, he's everything for them. I'm curious to see how the Spurs defend that, what they do against a team that that could be a reason why they added CJ McCollum, of course, because I think he's one of the better pick and roll ball handlers in the league. But it's going to be interesting to see how the Spurs kind of force them to play to their weaknesses, if they can do that. And you mentioned, DeJounte's deal, right? He may not be 100% healthy, right? Feeling great. It could be an interesting matchup to see how the Spurs, how are they going to cater to what's going on right now, right? If they don't have DeJounte on the perimeter, at least as an on-ball defender, well, what's that going to look like? Is that going to have a domino effect for their team defense, something that they've struggled with all year? So I think that's one thing that kind of really stood out to me. And lastly, before I kind of throw it to you again, so the Pelicans, they're 3rd in second chance points and 11th in points in the paint. And the Spurs, they rank 28th and 26th in those defensive categories. So I don't know, man. This matchup, especially specifically on the defensive end, there's going to be a lot of moving pieces. I'm personally thinking it might be a pretty high scoring game, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I actually think it might be sort of like the Grizzlies game last year, where, it wasn't like that high scoring. Both teams didn't really shoot that well from the field, but it's going to be super competitive, tooth and nail. And I expect that. I mean, like the playoffs, this is not the playoffs, but it is a playoff atmosphere. These kind of games, everything kind of slows down. Teams are a little bit more methodical. Defenses are set. I don't really know what to expect. I think the one thing that is going to be really huge, not just Dejounte being available, as a defender, because I'm pretty sure he's going to be back. Like all the indications, he's going to be back before the end of the season. He's going to be fine for this matchup. But even when he has been healthy, he really struggled scoring against the Pelicans this season. 40% from the field, 26% from three, and that's in 4 matchups. I mean, like, I just don't really know that there is any team that's better equipped to stop Dejounte than the Pelicans. Not only do they have Herb Jones, who arguably as a rookie should be on the all-defensive first or second team, just been amazing for them as a defender. They've stuck him on Dejounte each time, and he has really bothered Dejounte. And then you got Jose Alvarado, the little point guard they have there, who's hiding in the corner of the courts, swiping balls from behind, coming over as a help defender, poking balls free. Like, he's really bothered Dejounte as well. And even when Dejounte's able to get to the rim, Jackson Hayes has blocked 8 of his shots this season. I mean, Dejounte is not really a guy who finishes with, power above the rim, and he's not really a guy, at least for most of the season, who has really sought out contact. He usually looks to finish with length, and Jackson Hayes has smacked a ton of his shots off the backboard. So this is sort of like the perfect trio to keep Dejounte in check. Now, the one thing I will say is, even though he hasn't really scored very well, he's still 9 rebounds, nearly 10.3 assists per game against the Pelicans this year. So he can still get his teammates involved, and I think that's going to be really huge, because even if Dejounte does not shoot well, he's proved that he can get his teammates involved, that he can make them better, and that's going to be huge, because if he can get the ball to other guys, but they're not making their shots, then it won't really matter, because Dejounte is the head of the snake. You cut off the head of the snake, well, he's going to dish it out to somebody. But if they're not making their shots, if Devin's not making his shots, Keldon's not making his shots, Josh Richardson's not making shots, then it doesn't really matter. So for me, this is going to be a really tight matchup. I'm excited for it, really, honestly. A team that has this much familiarity, they're in the same division. They play each other 4 times a year. This is the same thing as the Grizzlies a year ago. Make it a 5th matchup. And it was arguably the best matchup of the year. So, man, that's kind of all the thoughts that I have on this matchup. Unless you have anything else,
I got one.
I'd love to hear it if you do. Lay it on me.
No, I got one more thing, because we got to do it. If we're gonna be the guys that say that some people think are being a little too negative or whatever, and we have takes that we're gonna go and review, I think we're gonna start it right now, man. I need a prediction. Who do you think's gonna win? I need to hear it. I need to hear a score. I need to hear all that, man. I want to hear it.
Personally, I think the Blazers. I'm sorry.
If the Blazers beat the Spurs, we're going to have an issue.
If the Spurs are playing the Blazers in the play-in, then it's a 40-point blowout, no doubt. No. So they're playing New Orleans, and I think New Orleans will be healthy at this point. They're going to have Brandon Ingram. They're going to have CJ McCollum. They might have Zion. I'm going to go ahead and assume that he won't play, but they still have CJ. They still have Brandon. They got Herb Jones. They've got a guy like Jose Alvarado, who's been really good off the bench for them. And one guy who I think is kind of discounted is Devontae Graham. It's kind of weird to say they go as he goes, but he's a guy who takes a ton of shots, especially from 3. Now, he's not really that efficient. He's below league average from every area on the court, but he gets hot in a hurry. Like, if this guy gets hot in a hurry, he drops 30, he drops 25, he drops, whatever, then you could have a problem. So I'm looking at this game through a realistic lens. They've got relatively good depth. They've got some really nice top-tier talent in terms of Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, Jonas Valanciunas. I think the Pelicans edge the Spurs out in a really close one. I'm going to go ahead and say it's something like 102-98. Like, I think this will be a 1 or 2 possession game, but I could be wrong. Like, when we look back at this, I wouldn't be surprised if the Spurs do win. Even though they're not necessarily playing their best basketball of the season, I think they're entering this game with the most confidence that they've had all year, especially going 7-3 over their last 10. And I believe 8-3 over their last 11. So they have a lot of confidence coming into this matchup. And they're the team that I think has more to lose, if that makes sense. Like the Pelicans don't really have a lot to lose. If they lose, they lose. Who cares? Zion can come back next year. You own the Lakers lottery pick. I think the Spurs are more motivated to win this game. And maybe that's a little bit biased on my part because I cover the Spurs every single game, and it just feels like they really want this. But that's just how I see this matchup. So what do you think is going to happen? What are your keys here, and what's the score, and who's going to be the big-time players in this game?
Oh man. I think for me, see, this is such a unique matchup. Like I hope the listeners know, like, all the numbers we've thrown out and everything we talked about, this matchup really is tough to evaluate. I think personally, it's going to be, now I said high scoring. I guess that was more of like a boomer take because like if you score in the 110s these days, that's not really like crazy high. I was thinking it's going to be like 116, 112. Two times they played this season, the winning team scored 124 points. I don't think they'll get that high. Probably, yeah, I think I'm going to go 115, 111. I think it's going to be, again, a really close game. I think the Pelicans will edge the Spurs. I think only because defensively, I think the Pelicans can, especially if Valanciunas gets going early. Devontae Graham, you've mentioned, right? He's always been that high volume, not really efficient kind of three-point shooter. But I think CJ McCollum and BI pose a really big threat for the Spurs off the bounce. I'm not going to lie, though. You've mentioned the Spurs' confidence, and they're playing, regardless of who they're playing in terms of the teams, they're a confident group right now. You can't tell them anything otherwise, right? So I think it's going to be really close. I think the scoring prowess of a guy like McCollum, of BI, I think Valanciunas, of Devontae Graham. You mentioned Jose Alvarado, a little 6-foot guard, 23 years old, just like me, man. I think the Pelicans have an interesting group, right? It's really intriguing, but I think the Spurs, they're just going to lose a close one against New Orleans. I think it's going to be one of those games where you look back and you're like, man, if only that possession changed a little bit, we'd be talking about something else. Like, you remember when they played Denver back in 2018, or what was it, 2018, 2019, and the Spurs ended up making it really close late. They had a couple of chances really late to tie the game or to even go up, and they fumbled the opportunity. I think we're going to see a little bit of the Spurs late game kind of execution, kind of still struggle, kind of bite them in the end. And I think overall the Pelicans will edge them out in a close one, a 4-point victory for New Orleans.
I think that's fair. And two guys who I know we mentioned him like really briefly, but Jackson Hayes has been starting at the 4 next to Jonas Valanciunas, and I think that's really like going to be an interesting dynamic because you look at how the Spurs have played the Pelicans since they had that huge blowout loss, right? Just one game since then, but they've tried to combat that with a 2-big lineup. And so your 2-big lineup is Jakob Poeltl and probably Zach Collins, right? I imagine Keita Bates-Diop may come off the bench as your 4. I don't see Jock Landale coming off the bench too much. I mean, he could if one of those guys are tired or in foul trouble, but that's going to be a really interesting dynamic because not only do they have Jackson Hayes and they also have Jonas Valanciunas, but Willie Hernan-Gomez has been really solid off the bench for them this year as a scorer. As a defender, he's a sieve. He's basically a turnstile. You're going to score him in every time. He's not a good defender. But they also have a guy, Larry Nance Jr., who is one of the better and more versatile defenders at the 4. He can, guard 3, 4, 5. That's going to be interesting too. He played a little bit in the last game. That was one of his first games of the season. He's starting to get some chemistry with these guys. He's starting to go on a roll here. So just a lot of interesting things to keep track of for this matchup. But man, I think that about does it, unless really you have any last things you want to add. I want to give you every chance to get any last thought you have about this matchup, because this is probably going to be, one of the last games of the season. Regardless if the Spurs win this or lose this or make it to the playoffs, they're not a champion. They're not a Western Conference finalist. So this is probably one of their last games of the season, regardless of what happens.
Yeah, I think before we close it out, just want to thank everyone at Pounding the Rock, and yourself included, man, for my first season. This is dope. I learned so much. Regardless of what happens after this, man, it's been an honor to work with you and, JR, with everyone, really. It's been an honor to get grilled a couple times with my stuff. I feel like I've learned so much from those opportunities, though, man. And to all the listeners, thank you. I believe we're number 3 on Apple Podcasts for Spurs Podcast or something like that recently.
Yep.
Yeah, man, I appreciate every single one of y'all from the bottom of my heart. and you as well, brother. Like, yeah, you mean a lot to me, bro. So I appreciate you. I appreciate everyone that's been listening. And regardless of what happens, I mean, this next episode, the season in review, I hope y'all listen and tune in because there's some things I was right about, some things I was wrong about, and I'm no stranger to admitting my faults. So I'm ready to get into that. But that's all I got, bro.
Yeah, man, and I really appreciate you. I don't know if the listeners really know this, but like Dame and I, we have a meeting every single week. It's usually about like 30 minutes to an hour. We talk about, what are we going to talk about on this episode? We text each other back and forth about the games. We make this rundown here. Dame wrote the rundown this week. And so he puts a lot of time into this. Like, I know it's only usually like an hour episode, but, outside of just writing for us at Pounding the Rock, he does a ton for this podcast. He's helped me so much as a co-host. So, man, I really appreciate you, and it makes me feel really good that, you're showing us praise and that you thank me for helping you because, honestly, you've helped me a lot too. Being able to edit your work, being able to, help you grow has helped me grow as well. So, man, the feeling is mutual, but, that does it for this week. So, again, thank you for hopping on yet another episode as my co-host. So, just go ahead and let everybody know, these good Spurs fans know, where they can find your content, where they can find you on social media, and the floor is yours, man.
Yeah, so go ahead and follow me on Twitter at DA Bartonek. That's at DABARTONEK. I do a lot of football stuff for Rigo's Rag. I cover the Commanders, so you get a lot of Commanders content from me. You'll get some Spurs tweets and some Spurs. I've been doing a lot of like previews and stuff this season. Hopefully I can kind of really start to dabble with the NBA draft stuff, some offseason stuff. Heading into the summer. I can't wait for that. But yeah, man, it's been fun. Y'all be sure to subscribe to the show. Show Noah some love. Noah's been doing some great stuff. I love all the AP style tweets he puts out. It's low key. When Matt said that, I just started laughing. I was like, that's a fact, bro. That's a fact. But overall, yeah, thank y'all for tuning in, bro. And audition to you, man.
Yeah, and if you want to find those AP style tweets, you can follow me at _Magaro. And thank you again for joining us, and thanks to everybody who tuned in for this episode of Alamo City Limits. And for those of you listening at home, make sure to subscribe. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. We've got an amazing staff of writers, including myself, Damien Bartonek, J.R. Wilco, Marilyn Dubinsky, Bruno Pasos, Jesus Gomez. I mean, you name it. We've got a loaded roster over at Pounding the Rock, so go ahead and check our stuff out. But until next time, Spurs fans, take care.